local board input. Now we've got 2 bits of local board input that will be actually heard as part of the items themselves. As I say, we've got Michael Wood will be here to speak to this item, and we've had a request from the Eden Albert board to speak to the Unitech item in confidence, and they'll be doing that. Are they? So that's it. Those are the only 2. Sorry, Tam just thought there was another one, but there's not. So those are the only 2 bits of local board input. Extraordinary business, nope. Notice of motion, no. We've got the reports pending. I'm happy to move.
Sorry, Madam Chair, was Rodney local board, did they request to talk at the SHA discussion?
Oh, sorry, yes, at the
Kumu.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll just try and let them know what time we think that might be when we're a little bit closer.
Well, if they don't know.
Along. Okay. I'm happy to move. Oh, can we just get rid of that? I'm happy to move the reports pending. Second that. Thank you, Councillor Penrose. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And we've got the memos. Same. I'll move that.
Same.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. So we move on to item 11, which is housing for older people, and this is the discussion on our eligibility criteria. Welcome, Kat and Kevin.
Morning Chair, councillors and members. We're really pleased this morning to bring item 11 to you, not least because it represents the final piece of work for us in merging the former legacy housing services into one seamless Auckland Council housing for older persons services. You'll probably recall as part of the LTP that we standardised rental for these services, and that's been successfully implemented during the first quarter of this financial year, and we now turn our attention to standardisation of eligibility criteria. The main driver for this is clarity and simplicity. With regard to our customers who currently are experiencing quite some confusion in trying to navigate through the 5 operative legacy sets of criteria, and also clarity and simplicity in terms of readiness for entering into partnership with partner or partners in future around the delivery of these services. You'll be aware again that we're working with Panuku Development Auckland and currently the RFP stage of seeking partner and partners for the future. The recommendation is that you adopt the standardised criteria, that you don't apply them to existing tenants, but that you do apply them to people on the waiting list presently. We discussed this recently with local board chairs, and probably the key area of interest for local board chairs related to the standardisation around age. So the report suggests that we make 65 the key qualifying criteria, the age of 65 in future. And we've included some information, some data in Appendix C, demographics, that talk to that. But I'll just take a moment just to clarify the key stats in terms of impact. So the population at large, by standardising to an age of 65, there'll be 55,000 Aucklanders who won't qualify for service in the future. There'll be a pool of 163,000 Aucklanders who will continue to qualify. There's currently about 386 persons. By changing the age, 60 people on that waiting list will no longer be eligible. About 37 of those are located in the south of Auckland. If we think about impact on Māori, then the change in age will mean that 4,000 persons wouldn't be eligible in future. Over 6,000 persons would remain eligible. There's about we estimate 5 people on the current waiting list wouldn't be eligible. 3 of those are in the south and 2 of those are in the north. So as you say, Madam Chair, I'm joined by Kat Tierney, Manager Community Occupancy, who's led most of the work in this area, and we're happy to provide any further clarification.
Lovely, thank you. I'm sure there will be questions, and I think the thing we just need to say loudly and clearly, this will not impact on current residents. I think there has been a little bit of concern. We just need to be very clear. The current residents will not be impacted on by this, any change in eligibility criteria. Can't be clearer than that. Councillor Casey.
I've got a question and an amendment. My question is about people over 65 who have a disability. Do we have, is it completely accessible, our housing, or is it intended to be? So if you're over 65, when you meet the criteria for live independently, if needs mean you need a ramp and you need extra door space, is that accommodated?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. The portfolio is around half accessible currently. The footprint of the existing tenancies doesn't mean that there's necessarily a turning circle in all the houses. We do work to retrofit in accessible ramps and rails. We are developing new levels of service to go into our partnership with that require everything to be universally designed so that there's always access, whether somebody requires it or not.
What's the timeline on making the other 50% fully accessible through retrofitting?
Some of them will not be accessible because the footprint is too small to provide turning circles for wheelchairs at the time it was built. So those will be long-term plan changes where we do work with our tenants to make sure that we find a home that is right for them, and then if their accessibility changes over time, we will look to transfer them into another unit that is more accessible for them.
So of those that can be made accessible, what's the timeline?
I don't have that information.
Are you going to get it to me, or you don't have it at all? Sorry.
Until such time as we've investigated the partnership further, because in some cases that will require a complete redevelopment of the site because the actual apartments themselves or the units themselves are too small to be what we would consider fully accessible. So that will be a long-term outcome.
Okay. And my second one was just the amendment is just to move a B, noting that changes to the eligibility criteria do not apply to existing tenants or those on the waiting list as at 31st of December. It's in the report, but I think it needs to be spelled out because when I read it last night, I got, I came in with a whole raft of questions which I've had answered through your presentation. So that really is just to add in a B, making it very clear.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Ngamane.
Oh, kia ora. Is that right? People on the waiting list won't be affected by this because one of my questions relates to that.
So through the Chair, current recommendation up there, note that the changes do not apply to existing tenants, but do apply to tenants currently on the waiting list.
There's an amendment.
So in relation to the development of the criteria, what input from Māori was sought, either mana whenua or mātāwaka?
Through the Chair, when we looked through the standardisation, we were tasked operationally to standardise existing criteria. There weren't any existing criteria that applied specifically to Māori. When we saw that the age impact, so we worked with housing providers and also with aged advocacy groups. When we realised that the change in age criteria would have what we saw as a higher impact on Māori, we did attempt to get feedback through various council resources, but unfortunately we didn't receive any feedback.
So you consulted or you didn't?
We didn't consult directly with mana whenua or Matawaka.
So of those 60 on the waiting list, how many are Māori?
We don't currently require people to announce ethnicity on application. When we've reviewed the existing waiting list and through the interview process, our staff have estimated that there's 5 Māori who would be affected of that potential 60, 3 in the south and 2 in the north.
And you mentioned 4,000 overall will be affected.
That's of the whole population 60 to 65. Across the Māori population 60 to 65.
Right, not taking into account those with needs below
no,
60.
that is only the gross population data, knowing that when we look at that, there's a very small contingent of that who would be accessible for our housing through income and also housing need.
Yeah, so as you acknowledged, there will be a greater impact on Māori and I understand Pacific peoples too by the change in criteria, but you do note that there's a future engagement program relating to it and partnership approaches, etc. What do you expect will be the outcome of that, and what does that look like?
Certainly.
And is that planned?
That is absolutely planned as part of the Auckland Development Committee resolution to go out to the wider sector to look for a housing partner. This committee actually amended the resolution to look for a partner to make sure that the Māori responsiveness framework was included in any expression of interest or RFP that goes out. We've received in those RFP now, and all of them do look constructively at the Māori responsiveness framework and have announced that they will be looking at partners within mana whenua and Matawaka to work with to develop a correct response to Māori that fits Auckland. And there is also the potential for a future partner to add subsistence to the sector, which would also support Papakainga development.
And so all those approaches are necessarily linked to the gap you see that's being created by the change in the criteria? Like, is there a conscious gap that you're working with?
Through the chair, I don't know if they will specifically look at that.
Ought they? I mean, ought council? If a gap's being created by this?
Certainly. That is a potential to look at the criteria again
I
in a
suggest if a
partnership.
gap is being created by the standardisation and the change of criteria that impact adversely on Māori, that there's some kind of conscious assessment of that and alignment of that against these other initiatives that we're yet to see. So it's probably just
Certainly.
where I'll leave it.
So,
We will take a note of that.
Chair, if I could make the comment, we don't believe that there are particular unfavourable impacts in what's proposed here for Māori. And actually, if you look at the key figures around this, there's evidence to suggest that this service is very successful in supporting Māori within Auckland. So in terms of population at large, over 60, Māori make up about 4.5% of Auckland's population. If you look at our waiting list, they make up 8.3% of our waiting list. If you look at who are actually the tenants and recipients of these services, they make up 11% of our tenant base. So it suggests that this service is available and accessible to Māori.
So you have that analysis?
And that